Here we go. Hello, hello. I hope everyone's doing well. Yeah, I decided to go with some changes. So, this episode wasn't in my plans to make, but once I found out about this train wreck, I decided to drop everything and focus on this. This video also gives me a way that I can be a little bit more entertaining, because to do a response video, I need to tap into a little bit of rage. So we're going to talk about the debate Jubilee hosted between men's rights activists and feminists. On a side note, I hope we can rightfully call the lovely Pearl Davis an MRA now, since she appeared on the panel under the label of that team. It's just that to this day I've not heard her come out and say it. Maybe she has, but perhaps she expects her actions to speak louder than words. She's also given a platform to a few prominent MRAs. But this guy, however, we'll get to him. Before we begin, I will say I am on the men's rights team, and I'm going to be bringing fire. Some of you are not going to like what I have to say. This is actually an obligation for me. It's not just that there's issues important to me, but part of my principle of my interest in philosophy is logically discerning reality. Encouraging people to see it and accept it for what it is. Now, I can show you what both of these propositions look like right now. What's important to me as an MRA, and what I mean by seeing reality for what it is. Take a moment to look at this. These are 3 screenshots, each taken from legislation from 3 different Western countries: England, Australia, and the United States. You can look them up for yourself to see that I've not fabricated them. These are easily Googled criminal codes. They explicitly state female genital mutilation is a crime, punishable by, I think, 5 or 10 years in prison. What you also might notice is, especially in the Australian Crimes Act, that male genital mutilation is nowhere to be seen. Nor can it be found in the American or British legal codes. If you try searching for it, you'll only find references to female genital mutilation. Now, this is clear, openly verifiable proof that women have more rights than men. Okay, now, it doesn't matter what kind of excuses you can come up with to justify why we do this to baby boys but not to baby girls. Okay, none of these excuses changes the fact of what's presented in front of you right now. Women have a protected right to intact genitals, which men don't have. This isn't the only right I can point to, by the way. In fact, I challenge any of you to try and find a legal code that explicitly states the word male or makes an unambiguous reference to men, to the exclusion of women. And I say unambiguous because the word man, as we know, is sometimes used as the Old English gender-neutral definition. And I mean gender-neutral definition. In Old English, you could call an adult female a man, and it would have been exactly the same thing as calling her an adult person. Because man, once upon a time, did not mean male. Like, it literally did not mean that. And if you want to know why the word man is a prefix in a lot of English words, is because of its Latin root, which means hand. So all of our words like manufacture and manuscript are words that involve manual labor, and manual labor was traditionally done with one's hands. It has nothing to do with male dominance, like some very amusing but unimaginative feminists would have you believe. Alright, so I've set the scene. You know now women have more rights than men, if you didn't already. Now let's try to digest the opening of Jubilee's debate.
Men already have all their rights. If you agree, step forward.
Men already have all of their rights. I know that might seem like an innocuous premise to argue with, but I'm a little bit sensitive to the way people pick their words, and the wording here is a little bit sinister. Men already have all of their rights. You see, what feminists used to say was men already have the rights. But that was many years ago, said by many prominent feminists, and of course, you might know what those of us who disagree with feminists went and did. We went and told them that it's not true. Look, here are rights women have that men don't. And it's been this way for at least the past 30 or 40 years you've been claiming otherwise. And now this is what they're telling us. Men have all of their rights. Could that be all of the rights you ever intend on letting us have? We'll get to that in a moment.
Rights. If you agree, step forward.
Okay, the moment I saw, I think it's Ariel, that guy who supposedly is on the men's rights team, eagerly stepped forward in agreement with this premise, I knew. Everyone knew. I mean, it's kind of obvious. Why the hell would you be calling yourself a men's rights advocate or activist if you think they already have all of their rights?
I hate the name men's rights activist because it does imply that as if our rights are being taken away.
Again, I don't know why you're on that team if you hate being called that. And it doesn't directly imply anything is being taken away. If anything, it directly implies something is missing.
The problem that men face is more existential. The patriarchy conditions men or assigned male at birth people to...
Yeah, okay, yeah. At this point, everyone on the men's rights team knows this is not an MRA. It's a feminist. Okay, I've followed the MRM for the past 10 years. We occasionally talk about this conjecture feminists call patriarchy theory of oppression, from a perspective of why men are so often the ones in positions of power. But we mostly criticize the feminist interpretation of what patriarchy is as being wrong. This so-called patriarchy does not oppress women. They are categorically a privileged class above men, both legally and socially. Now, if I'm honest, I've actually got no serious issue with that. I do have a huge problem, though, with people not being able to see it. Yes, women do have problems and get abused by a minority of very bad men. Believe me when I say, I know such a man, and I have been fighting this selfish bastard for years. Being a men's rights advocate does not mean that I am blind to male abusers. But to top off Ariel's position as a feminist.
Our rights aren't really under attack. Meanwhile, half of Congress hasn't codified Roe v. Wade. They're trying to control women's bodies, and it's just ridiculous. Like, our rights aren't under attack, but a lot of women's rights are, and I think it's important that we fight for that.
Right.
Since this is a philosophical dive in seeing reality for what it is, what do you think this guy is? Do you think my assertion he's a feminist is correct? Or is he a men's rights advocate, activist? When his primary position is in agreement with the feminist interpretation of what civilization is, an oppressive male-dominated world, and his sympathy is geared towards women's rights. For this reason, we won't be hearing from Ariel, an obvious feminist planted saboteur, unless he demonstrates something else we can all learn from. I've been learning a lot so far. And I've got to trim this down.
In a way, I think that's just an effect of patriarchy.
I agree.
We're not like losing our bodily autonomy.
We're not losing our bodily autonomy. Well, no, you already have all of your rights, sir. And we don't think you have a right to determine your bodily autonomy of what can and cannot be done with your penis after birth.
we're not, fearing for our lives walking down a dark hallway,
Yeah, we do fear for our lives walking out everywhere in the world. We are scared walking alone at night. I've had to do it. We are scared of going to pubs and nightclubs. I've done it lots of times. I know men are scared of being hurt because we know muggers and drunken, drugged up idiots like to pick fights. And you could be one of their targets. And I have been one of their targets. But what I've gone and done is assumed that I can take care of myself. Assumed I can fight back. And that's what the rest of you do, isn't it? You do it as well. So you don't say anything and you just get on with it. And then people assume that because men are not saying anything about their fears, and they're instead facing them, men therefore are not fearful of their lives, therefore have no threat to their person. When in fact they do. Women have the same fears as men, but do not think they can handle them. They do not assume they can fight back. So they vocalize their fear, then people assume they therefore have a threat to their person. And they do, but it's not as great as the threat men have. Men are the majority of victims of violent crime, and they have a low chance of anyone coming to help if they scream. A woman screams, however, men come running to her rescue.
Most of the world's leaders are men. Most judges are men. Look at even our Supreme Court. There's 9 judges, and how many are women? It's the fact that women had to fight and ask to, in 1974, get access to have their own bank account. That's absurd. That's absurd.
Yes, we'll get into why men are often in these positions soon, but I want to do this one first. You see, feminists have had their nonsense corrected by the MRM and by standalone anti-feminists so much, they're actually running out of examples to demonstrate that men rule with an oppressive fist. Banks are highly concerned with money. I don't believe it was ever illegal for women to own a bank account. It's just that banks were simply hesitant to approve women of one. The issue around women's bank accounts was not that they couldn't open any. They could. They've been using bank accounts since time immemorial. The issue surrounding women's bank accounts was that of married women. They could not open a bank account without their husband acting as a co-signatory or a guarantor. This was an action banks specifically took. It wasn't legally mandated by the government. Nor was it illegal in any way for women to own a bank account of their own. It's even noted in history that women opened up and owned their own banks. And they could discriminate and serve only women if they wanted to. This law, as highlighted here, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, simply made it illegal for banks to discriminate. They weren't legally obliged to deny women a bank account. This is something the banks did of their own choosing based on what they were socially aware of at the time. And what people are socially aware of even today is that men are the financial providers. On average, it was not illegal for a bank to give a married woman a bank account. Or at least there's nothing I've been able to find that said it was. People were actually quite socially aware in ye olden days, and banks knew women weren't the ones earning the big bucks to reliably pay back any loans on said accounts. I could tell you right now, the motives of the so-called patriarchy was not a scheme to oppress women for men's benefit. It was men with an instinct to provide for family and society, in the practical way they could, given the environmental and technological constraints they had to live with at the time. Every right men have initially came with responsibility. It was not expected of women to have the responsibility of being a financial provider, and still isn't, despite all the feminism challenging gender roles. Oh, and by the way, men also had to fight for their rights, just like women did.
For some men, all they have is their notion of masculinity to the point that they cannot let it go and they can't see anything else other than that. When the actuality is, again, gender isn't real. We're just plants with complicated emotions. When I look at people, I just see human-shaped flowers.
Yeah, I would.
Like I said, we'll come back to Ariel if he says anything we can learn from. He's of the position that men don't want to let go of their masculinity. Which is weird. I don't know why any man would want to let go of that any differently to why any woman would want to let go of her femininity. But then he makes this quite bizarre assertion with no reasoning given or requested to back it up.
Can't see anything else other than that. When the actuality is, again, gender isn't real. We're just plants with complicated emotions. When I look at people, I just see human-shaped flowers.
Yeah.
You see, I know to all of you that makes no sense. Like, what nonsense is that? You might even just disregard it as him being poetic. I don't think so. I think I know where that comes from. And I think I know where this, quite ironically, feminist plant learned how to be a feminist plant.
Plants are the enveloping feminine matrix of control and refurbishment. Animals are something invented by plants to move seeds around.
I suspect Ariel here is a student of a psychedelic feminist adventurer known as Terence McKenna. He had some wild ideas. Not just that animals were created by plants, but that everything wrong about human existence came about specifically through the male ego creating agriculture and civilization. That we somehow lived in a paradise before civilization existed. You take Terence McKenna's feminist standpoint with contemporary intersectional feminist, or what is practically trans-inclusive feminism now, and I think you get our boy Ariel here. A intersectional feminist pot plant. A
human-shaped flower.
Okay, back to ignoring the feminist plant.
She ended up taking the kid to a different country, and now his kid doesn't speak his same language. He spent $300,000 trying to get that kid back.
Okay, so Pearl, after these guys and the feminist flower pot finished a circle jerk of self-satisfactory MRAs blame women for men's actions, Pearl described a situation where a woman explicitly committed an action against a man, and the patriarchy that supposedly supports men over women did nothing to help that man. So what was their reaction?
Back.
I want to look at women's stories as to why they don't want to get married. And I could go in.
Oh, apparently there was no reaction to what Pearl had to say. Except only, I don't want to hear about men's troubles, let's hear more stories from women. I haven't edited that, by the way. You can see for yourself on the source link between 7 minutes, 50 seconds and 8 minutes. They edited out whatever the hell the feminists said in response to Pearl's claim. This leads me to guess maybe their response did not make the feminist side of the argument look reasonable or sympathetic, to a disadvantage that men specifically suffer.
Issue. On aggregate, men and women after divorce, women see a 27% decline in the reduction of their income. They're more likely to be in poverty.
Thank you for confirming that women's wealth comes from the oppressive patriarchy. And we'll soon see men's wealth comes from the, I don't know, their manual labor?
In the world, included some that are considered like very first world progressive feminist countries, Austria, Finland, Switzerland, they have male-only conscription, and many countries have higher pension ages for men.
Thomas here just gave you an example of a responsibility enforced on men that is not enforced on women. Now go back to believing we live in an oppressive patriarchy that exploits women for men's benefit.
When it comes to the family court, we want to be like, oh, dads need 50% custody, but you don't even know your kid. You've been off providing all this time. And
One moment later.
Nothing to do with the children at heart. It has to do with, I'm their father. I deserve 50% custody. But where were you the first 10, 15 years that we were raising the kids?
Holy shit. She said that straight, without batting an eyelid. She said men have been busy providing for their children while trying to say they are never there for their children.
You've been off providing all this time, but where were you the first 10, 15 years that we were raising the kids? You've been off providing, but where were you?
But you all are, aren't you? The fathers watching this right now. You don't just work for your families, you do try to take time, what time you can, to spend with them. I do know a father who does that, even though he's not the best at conversation. Well, he can be, but you'll only find this if you hit on a subject that he likes to talk about. And when you do, you might find he has a character and a wisdom that you hadn't seen before. I did this too when my mother was alive. Sure, I did spend a lot of my free time in my room video gaming, but when I was working 12 to 14 hour shifts as an apprentice chef, when I came home, the first thing I would do is shower, get into my pajamas, and then sit down with Mum. She'd often stay up until I got home, and we'd finish watching the movie she had on. She worked as well, by the way. We both had to. But that's what a lot of you do, isn't it? Don't let women like this get away with smearing your character. Okay, we're sufficiently near the end of that chapter, and I'm happy with how the men's team handled that, and curiously enough, the feminist plant had little to say.
Women experience more sexism than men. If you agree, please step forward.
I'm coming at this from like the point of view of like what's more dangerous.
Exactly.
Like misandry, men's feelings get hurt, but when it comes to misogyny and like sexism, women get hurt, killed. So,
do women experience more sexism than men? Now, Ezeki? Is that just a fancy way of writing Isaac? We're going to go with Isaac. Okay. Isaac here decided to pull a clever trick. You see, anyone who even spends their time casually online will have heard a great deal of shit said about men. In fact, if you watch TV at all, you'll hear a great deal of shit said about men. It's one of the reasons why I stopped watching TV. Isaac is aware of this. People are not the NPCs you think they are. Oh, well, some are, but some are like the antagonist NPCs. They're not just following a narrative. They know they're following a narrative, and it's their job to keep it alive against any challenge by a player character.
I'm coming at this from like the point of view of like what's more dangerous. Exactly. Like misandry, men's feelings get hurt, but when it comes to misogyny and like sexism, women get hurt, killed. So
that's what he just did. He, like everyone else, knows all we've done for the past 50 frickin' years is tell men they're bad in a manner that can be easily interpreted as hateful. So he tried to turn the table over and say, you know what's really important? Not who experiences more hatred, but who's in most danger. Well done. Change the focus of the question before it's even addressed to something you think is more convenient. It's funny, no one said this was about hatred. The question was about sexism, but he conflated the two and redirected the narrative focus to basically conclude that, well, yeah, men experience hatred, but it's not like their lives are in danger because of it. I mean, I was literally told last week that hatred against men doesn't happen. Now I'm being told it does, but it's not systemic.
I'm not gonna fear for my life, you know what I mean? As opposed to women, I think they genuinely do fear for their lives more, and I think we should work towards making a safe society for everybody.
Right.
And I think that that's ultimately, you know, what's important.
A safe society for everybody. after concluding it's only women who experience fear and need this sense of safety. Men don't, apparently. I've done this clip a dozen times because at this point I'm getting angry. But I know how these selfish, man-hating interpret men's anger. They don't see it as pain that deserves any sympathy or patience. They don't even see it as pain that they're causing. But okay, why am I angry? Because they obviously don't ever talk to us and listen to understand. They assume we don't feel fear because we don't express it, because we think we can take care of ourselves. And instead of accepting that, taking a moment to think, okay, men do experience fear like women do, and actually suffer greater danger than women do. Instead of acknowledging that, they just go on to say it's men's fault for not talking about their feelings. And go right on to forget that it's well established that men are in greater danger on the street than women are, and cannot expect to receive any help. Feminists, on the off chance any of you are actually listening to me a shot, could you do as I suggested? Recognize men do experience fear, like women do. I am telling you that now, and accept that we are actually in greater danger than women. And I'm going to ask one more thing. Please do not go on to say that it's men's fault for being a danger to other men. Okay, you know what you're doing there. It's to dismiss men's issues as men's problem, so you have justification to redirect the focus on women. If you actually care about men enough to help them with their issues, and this isn't some political game to filter all of the attention to women, then consider for a moment that feminism is wrong about some things, and that not everything men suffer is as simple as their own fault. You're not going to solve men's issues with that attitude, because it is, again, neglecting to actually listen to what men are influenced by, what's making them so angry and so desperate as to be presenting as a threat to other men. I know you think it's the patriarchy. I'm sorry, that's still not listening. That is a foregone conclusion that doesn't require further discussion. It's a foregone conclusion to say, let's get back to smashing the patriarchy, and we promise, if we dismantle patriarchy, then men will somehow stop being a threat to each other. If that's the bullshit I'm about to hear, I'm not listening. Okay, because this happens every time. As a men's advocate, this is what I get every time from a feminist. When I point out something men suffer, something that they feel discontent about, and the feminist does nothing but dismiss it to refocus on women. Okay, so your patriarchy makes men repress their feelings, men just need to open up more, is bullshit. And you know it's bullshit. Because you clearly expect us to repress our feelings to make room for women's feelings. Please, just consider the possibility that feminism is wrong about some things. I propose it's wrong about why men are so stoic. To understand this requires you consider that women do have some power to influence people, and this power actually contributes to shaping society. I mean, think about why women find it so easy to ask for help. Why they expect sympathy when they're looking for it, and men don't. Now think. This is a state of mind men internalize without thinking about it, and so they don't open up and just take care of themselves. Telling them to do the opposite of what they've effectively been trained to do is not going to do anything. To help men in this regard requires you work with them, instead of telling them to work with you.
Men are each other's worst enemy.
You don't say, Isaac, but you're not being an enemy to men as you blame your own kind for everything wrong with the world. Now we're almost at 15 minutes. And I'm 33 minutes into making a video. I'm not going to play any clips from the feminists speaking here. We've heard a lot about them and patriarchy. Time for a cleanser. Because this is leading up to Thomas and his on-point rebuttals. I'm going to make a proposition, and then we're going to hear a little bit from Thomas and what he has to say. So, my proposition. In a video I did a while back on capitalism, I said something I've been wanting to correct for a while. I said patriarchy is a state of nature. Now, I don't believe in the feminist version of patriarchy. All I do is recognize the same thing that they're seeing. The men are often in positions of authority, like presidents, CEOs, bosses, and, in general, leaders. And yes, it's also very important to note men are building and maintaining civilization. So yes, all of this is valid pieces of evidence for what is the old definition of patriarchy, what the word used to mean before feminists got hold of it, which was simply the rule of men. It wasn't a standalone concept. We also have an old word for the rule of women, and it's called matriarchy. It is a real concept that's existed before. The United Kingdom, and all of its colonies, which includes my fair country, Australia, during the recent and late reign of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, were all under a matriarchy. Again, I want to bring us back to being able to interpret reality as it presents itself to us, rather than what we project onto it. Patriarchy is not a conspiracy of men against women. It is just simply the rule of men. Their motives are not explained in this definition. Matriarchy is the rule of women. Their motives also undefined. Queen Elizabeth was a matriarchy, and so her kingdom, that was England, was a matriarchy. Yes, being a constitutional monarchy, they let nation states run themselves, and they've been doing that for so long, it's given people the false impression the United Kingdom has no authority over its colonies. It does. Just off the starting block, for us to adjust our laws, we need to get approval from England first. But the proposition I want to put forward, and to correct my previous statements, is patriarchy is a product of matriarchy, and matriarchy is a state of nature. This is another thing about reality we forget. We are animals. This thing around us, this civilization, deludes us into thinking that we are something separate from them. We're not. Most of us are still just following our animal instincts, only adjusted for living in an artificial environment. If you've ever seen GoPro videos of cats, what they get up to outside, they behave very differently to how they do indoors. Even they adapt their instincts to an artificial environment, with rules different to their own peer group, yet they're still animals living on instinct. Now, from what I've seen of most animal relationships, from mammals to insects, is that they are matriarchal in their nature. For example, the females are in charge of sexual selection, and the males have to prove their worth. The females wait for an acceptable male to put himself forward. Funny, that's just like what we do. Female animals, only real labor they have is protecting and providing for children, while the male animals protect and provide for the females and are mostly expected to look after themselves. That's funny. Kind of like what we do. And this is also something that is never brought up when feminists control the conversation, and it didn't get brought up in this debate either. Animals are gynocentric. They protect the females, even keeping the females from children to adults within the group, granting them the assurance of always having the support of a home and a family. They, however, encourage the males out of the group to survive on their own, and therefore the males are the majority of the homeless and the lonely. Gosh darn it, it's just so funny how that's like what we do. I think you can see what I'm saying. Now, I think the reason why, despite men's strength and power to dominate women, the overwhelming majority do not use it, is because they instead have enough compassion for women to reason with them. I think they always have, even back in the Stone Age, and I do not agree that prehistory was a story of BC Bill going around clubbing women over the head and taking them back to his cave for an eclectic selection of grapes. I think even without any verbal language, the relationships of cavemen were almost entirely consensual. I mean, imagine, for a second, if we couldn't speak, how could a woman tell a man no? Well, push him away, of course. It's something they still do, despite being able to just say no. And the men of the Stone Age very likely respected the woman's rejection just as most of us do today. Of course they did. Where did we, a social species, learn consent from? It didn't come out of the ether, or feminism's magic patriarchy smashing fairy dust. We've been practicing consent since before civilization existed, because human relationships were matriarchal in their nature, and still are. Pearl, you've talked about this. Where do you think this epidemic of husbands asking their wives first comes from? That attitude existed long before feminism did. There does appear to be this thing called patriarchy, but it doesn't work like feminists say it does. It overwhelmingly serves women's interests at the expense of men's. But this is why men build civilization. They have the matriarchal instinct to protect and provide for their families and themselves. On top of this is a curious intelligence that for the moment is unique to our species. This curiosity is what helps us figure out how to manipulate the environment, and so we mastered fire, architecture, and technology. Of course, since it was the men doing this, they had the most authority over it. However, their gynocentric instinct remained intact. So even though some laws were made with men's interests in mind, it was to balance fairness for the innate favoritism we have for women's interests. This favoritism is why women have more rights than men. It's why men are more disadvantaged with less support than women. Now, I don't think this is any kind of conspiracy of women's making. I think this is just an unchecked instinct. For the record, I am not an anti-gynocentrist. I care about women and I will continue to do so. All I want to do is increase our sense of androcentrism. We do have it, it's just minuscule compared to its opposite. And it's obviously needed to care about men more when you look at us having less rights, we suffer more crimes, and we're the majority of the homeless and the majority of the suicides. It's also important when you consider men instinctively care about women more than each other, as these guys have treaded over in this debate. Addressing all this requires recognizing we care too much about women and too little about men. And yes, feminists, you are perpetuating this problem. And at this point, I really have difficulty being charitable, and it's easy to think that you're doing it on purpose. So, enough about me for a moment. We'll just listen to what Thomas has to say. We'll just bear in mind that this patriarchy is gynocentric in its nature.
Cultural misandry is evident in a lot of the laws that neglect men. Misandry is why homeless men don't have as many shelters. It's why we don't take male victims of domestic violence as seriously. It's why men's health care is underfunded.
On point.
And there's a psychological phenomenon called the women are wonderful effect, where society and people have less empathy for men in a general sense.
On point.
But overall, we see social welfare programs and laws mostly disfavor men. And even if it's a male politician who supports that law, he's still catering to his voters.
On point.
But a lot of what you're referring to is just the relationship between men having disadvantages due to like socioeconomic status, and comparing that to benevolent misogyny, which does actually otherize women and is a form of dehumanization.
Benevolent misogyny. This is just like the concept of sexual objectification. They take women being valued, women being admired and desired, which are all positive experiences of recognizing women's humanity. They are obvious examples of women being loved, and they call it hatred. I'm going to bail out. I don't know if I don't know if I can do the remaining hour and 17 minutes. How does your brain do that? Just completely ignore, but simultaneously justify a self-contradictory statement.
The reason why misandry isn't systemic is because we don't live in whatever the opposite of we don't live in a matriarchy, right?
And how do I simply explain to him what I just spent 10 minutes explaining to you guys? Assuming he'd be in the mood to have an unsubstantiated foregone conclusion considered for a moment to possibly be wrong. No, my matriarchy proposition, which I am aware is not the first of its kind, it's not a foregone conclusion for me. Remember, I was correcting what I said in a previous episode, and I've substantiated it. A theory of matriarchy is something I have heard before, but I didn't understand it on my own terms. Now I do.
Whenever men enter a space, it becomes their space. They're bigger, they're stronger, they're louder, and a lot of times when women feel uncomfortable, we'll just excuse our way out, and it's just naturally become a male-only space.
I can't do it. I've said what I wanted to say, and this woman is... Oh, seriously.
A male-only space. That's why most shelters mostly have men, homeless shelters.
Apparently men push women out of a space, and that's why they're the majority of the homeless. I mean, last week I was told men are homeless because it's their fault they fail at life. Now it's because they push women out of homeless shelters. Because we just can't wait to be homeless. We've got to push our way in.
And the one guy that did try to start a domestic violence shelter for men, and he was like a big men's rights activist, but in the true sense, wanting men to have what you want, like domestic violence resources for just for them. He got so laughed out of the world, the dude ended up unaliving himself.
The man's name is Earl Silverman, and he wasn't laughed to death. Maybe some feminists laughed when they heard a men's rights activist who was a survivor of abuse started a shelter for men from his own pocket, but couldn't afford to keep it going without government help. Then, after being denied funding by the government, you know, that patriarchal system which for some reason funnels billions of dollars into women's shelters, that patriarchal government denied funding for a men's shelter, and then after going bankrupt trying to support that shelter, Earl Silverman left this mortal coil. Maybe some people would find that funny, but it wasn't us.
It was not MRAs who demonized Earl Silverman.
It was men.
It was us.
Toxic
That's what you're saying.
It was feminists, and the same thing with Erin Pizzey, who I've interviewed, by the way.
Blue, believe me when I say feminists have no idea who Erin Pizzey is. Yeah, some do, but your average feminist does not. You know how I know? Because out of all the feminist speeches I've heard praising women who led the women's rights movement, her name is not uttered. You would think the woman who started the first women's shelter in the whole frickin' world, from her own pocket and unstoppable determination, would be praised by feminists and known by all as an icon. And I say unstoppable determination because she was a little cheeky and took up abandoned buildings and got squatters' rights to increase the number of shelters she could provide. But she did something that was unspeakable in feminist orthodoxy. She didn't just look after women in those shelters. She sought to understand what happened. so she could help those women recover. And you're not allowed to understand what happened in a woman's relationship. Because that means learning that some domestic violence is not always one way of men to women. It would be learning that some violence is reciprocal. And some women, whether they're perpetrators or victims, take their pain out on their children, and the cycle of abuse repeats in the next generation. You're not allowed to try and understand any of this, because that would be victim blaming. And so Erin Pizzey watched as feminists hijacked women's rights and used it as a weapon against men, while she was forced to flee the UK after receiving threats to her life. And to this day, the patriarchy refuses to label feminism as a terrorist organization. Have a guess who it does have on its list of potential terrorists. You'll never guess. Women's sexual power over capital. I'm sorry, what I meant to say was women's sexual capital gives them an advantage over men. Look, I've really only got one thing to say at the moment, and that is, I don't have a problem with this dynamic. I have no issue with OnlyFans or other adult content. This is actually a bone I've got to pick with the manosphere. Your approach to politically attacking these women as whores is counterproductive to men's interests, and only serves the matriarchal instinct that only women should have authority over sexual relationships. That is to say, to the exclusion of male desire. Okay, it's in two parts, one's simple, one's complicated. Put simply, men like women. To state the obvious, men like sex. If women want to offer this freely in some shape or form, because like men, they enjoy it, then I don't understand why you are discouraging that. Have you forgotten how difficult things are for men as it is? But here's the complicated part. Matriarchy acts on the premise that women select. They select what men are allowed to play and when. Both conservatives and feminists are against women expressing sexuality for the same reason. You both think women lose value when they give themselves to men's desire. That's why you guys call them whores and why feminists call them sexually objectified. You are insulting not just women by saying they lose value through intimacy with men, but you are insulting men by saying their desires are the reason women become spoilt goods. It makes perfect sense to me why a feminist would be of this position. It makes no sense to me why you guys are. And I'm not saying encourage women to flaunt themselves. I'm just asking, leave the minority of the ones who want to alone. And I would ask the minority of the ones flaunting themselves, can you please stop calling us bad people for noticing what you're obviously doing? Seeking sexual validation from us. If it's not wrong for you to show it off, it's not wrong for us to enjoy it. And this is part of what I mean by moral bankruptcy in society. This refusal to come to an agreement that we have a right to each other's interests. In this instance, women have the interest to be desired, men have the interest to express desire. Can men and women come to some sort of agreement that this is fine, and neither one of us is doing anything harmful to anyone? We're just enjoying an aspect of being human? I don't think people are ready for this, for anything that I'm saying.
I feel like a lot of men like to Google at women, like to see them, objectify them, but they don't see them as human.
Objectification does not exist. It's a feminist euphemism to say male desire is bad. How is it bad? Well, they can't really say, but I can tell you what instinct is at play. It's because male desire acts outside of matriarchal authority. And you're not allowed to do that in a morally bankrupt society. I mean, a matriarchal society.
Or 7.
Yeah,
Oh,
this is a man's problem, not a woman's problem. Men need to control themselves.
Men need to control themselves. Something I hear from feminists and conservatives, as if we don't already. Again, the adult content we enjoy is not a control problem. It's not a problem in the first place. You people have the control problem. You try to control what other people can and can't do with their bodies. I, however, just appreciate what a person can and can't do with their body. Yes, appreciate what they can and can't do. For example, I appreciate women can grow life, and that sometimes they can't do something without a little help. Or well, they can, but it's just that I understand it would be nice to have the help.
A body, that's not what's happening. It's men that never learned how to deal with their emotions and their feelings and their urges.
We do control our urges. Enjoying adult content is not losing control, it's releasing pressure on a valve. My God, it doesn't hurt you or anybody you care about. It just annoys you that men are indulging in sexual gratification outside of your divine approval.
I didn't ask for. It's funny because when I'll go with my boyfriend, sometimes I'll go places and I get 5 chicken tenders instead of 4, or
5 chicken tenders instead of 4. That explains a lot. That was low. Seriously, all this controversy about sex work and sexual expression would be solved if all of you could accept sex as normal, instead of a dynamic of women are pure and men are impure. This dynamic of women are harmed and dehumanized by men's desire, or somehow devalued. Devalued. I mean, have you ever been rejected? Tell me, does it ever make you feel like you're worthless? Okay. Next chapter.
Feminism is trying to remove masculinity from society.
Is feminism trying to remove masculinity from society? The simple answer is yes. The complicated answer is some are trying to remove it, some are trying to control it. In this way, feminism is not actually a monolith, except only in that they agree men and masculinity are the problem. Therefore, this problem needs to be changed.
How do you raise masculine men? You need fathers in the home to teach them it. And feminism have given incentives to take the father out of the home. It's 50% of their DNA. Why don't they get 50% custody?
For children, there is no issue with men getting custody.
That's not true.
That's absolutely
not true.
You're just making numbers up.
So I'm confused. This has gone on to the family courts. Blue brought it back, but no one actually addressed what's going on, or the things feminists have said over the years demonizing men. I've forgotten the feminist name, but she said something along the lines of, a man does not exist. She claimed the Y chromosome is a malformed X chromosome, and so men are an incomplete woman. Karen has got a video listing all of the hateful things feminists have said about men. I'll pop the name and the direct quote of the feminist here.
Exactly. Yeah, can I expand on that actually?
Go ahead.
In my experience, I feel like when it comes to redefining masculinity, that's not even a real concept. We need to abolish gender as a whole.
Probably the most important question we could ask in this generation, given everything that's going on. What is a man? What is a man? You think it's funny and ludicrous that leftists can't tell you what a woman is. I've heard a total of 3 people, excluding myself, who could tell you what a man is. 3. Everybody else gives a garbled, cognitively dissonant mess that takes attributes common to both the masculine and the feminine. Or what this guy does, deny men even exist. And this part of the episode was also a garbled mess. Nico and Blue were good, but Nico landed in hot water. Because this is not something people have ever needed to care about before. Because of how intuitive gender is.
same side of feminism. I believe in destroying the patriarchy. I believe in destroying the ideas of gender. I agree with everything.
Isaac, as a fellow man, that was not masculine.
And when you think about it, feminists and men's rights activists could work together.
No, we can't. Men's rights advocates and women's rights advocates can work together. That's true. But that's not going to happen until feminists let their hostage go. Or maybe, just maybe, the hostage will fight back and free herself from feminism's grip. I'm trying to aim at feminism's head, but if women's rights can just break free of its hold, I'm going for the heart.
I come from a broken down family where my dad left when I was 14 and he never came back. I needed a father figure to teach me what it is to be a man.
Respect, Nico. I know I said you were in hot water before, but I can see why you're willing to be in that position. I needed to teach myself how to be a man too. But for different reasons.
Men should go to therapy. Agree.
Okay, next chapter. Therapy. I disagree. I've been to therapy. I've had a dozen sessions over my lifetime, and only one was useful. It taught me how stoicism works. In short, you control how you react to your feelings. Is the way you're thinking helping you attain your goals? If not, you can change the way you think, the way you approach a problem. But like I said, I disagree because most therapy I went to was useless.
Therapy, so that's the field that came up.
Yeah, but
Didn't take it exactly.
No, but I think it's noticing a pattern of
if it
putting
was a
women down
man-dominated field,
every
do you think she would be
single-
saying the same thing? I don't think so.
Well, men-dominated fields usually do better, so.
Can I?
Pearl knows how to make a guy blush. Not me, of course. I've got a heart of stone.
Like, you are doing the emotional labor for the relationship, men are not. I do think.
What the hell does doing emotional labor for women look like? Ariel, whatever your name is. Is it sitting quietly and listening to her talk as you reassure and comfort her from her problems? After she ignored you talking about your problems and then made the conversation about herself.
We're not taught to handle emotions seriously. Our emotions are discarded, so we tend to discard other people's emotions. And it's, again, very sad to see. So I don't think...
What's sad to see is you just painted men with the brush of apathy. Without a shred of compassion or sympathy, you claimed men have no compassion or sympathy. Not once have I gotten angry at what this feminist plant has said. I almost don't see a feminist plant. I see a jester. And I'm still not angry, but I have passed judgment.
It's important for women to become mothers.
Okay, next chapter. It's important for women to become mothers. Now, I honestly thought they'd all disagree. Okay, now, I agree. It is important for women to become mothers, right? And men to become fathers because of this whole thing of this species trying to survive against all odds. It is kind of important. But I still expected all of them to disagree because I know what this question is really asking. One of the main arguments from the feminist movement, one of the things they have complained about for 100 years, is the shackles of motherhood. Shackles of motherhood. Okay, in the old days, motherhood and fatherhood were virtuous responsibilities. Now they're considered burdens people are trying to avoid. You know how I talked earlier about matriarchy and you're not allowed to question women's authority, especially over sex and relationships? Well, this is one feminists have drilled into the public conscience hard. And not just this, but the notion that women do not have to do anything they don't want to do. So much so that it's offensive to expect of them to take on any responsibility for others. You are allowed to expect this from men, because we live in a patriarchy after all. Women should not be mothers. That is the feminist position. should not be. Instead, they should be free from the shackles of the barefoot pregnant kitchen ham sandwich and go live in the luxurious privilege of working day in, day out until you die. Look at how happy men are when they have to come home from a 12, 14-hour shift to be told, get your own dinner and do your own laundry. I'm not your mama. It's a great life. Complete self-reliance with no help or sympathy from anybody. I'm going on a tangent. Point is, I was expecting them to stay back because of the feminist brainwashing that we all have been exposed to and passively taken in to some degree. It takes years, and I mean years, to clear the fog of its bullshit. But then, to my surprise, Nico steps forward.
Odd one out, Nico.
What's that?
Get the fuck out. I know that seems innocuous, but it wasn't. He has the same narrative in his head as everybody else. Women do not have to do anything they don't want to. Odd one out Nico was a brainwashed, reflexive attempt at shame. I mean, odd one out. Have you forgotten what your job is, fella? Have you forgotten the motto of middle ground, which is all about disagreeing? Okay? Being the odd one out should not be something that needs to be said in an environment where any individual is allowed, even encouraged, to disagree. Look, my position is simply the logic of the proposition. It is important for the preservation of the species. Not all women have to do it. Not all women can. But can we acknowledge that it is important? And yes, that men should be fathers too. Because if we can't agree, then I don't know what's going to happen to the human race a generation or two from now. You know, because of the population decline of developed civilizations.
Motherhood is such a huge undertaking, and I feel like there's not enough education for girls, young girls and women, of all the physical side effects that can happen to you. Like,
yeah, this is just going to be a spiel of discouraging motherhood. I'm already bored. Yes, bored. You see, I'm not just a chef. I did study to be a nurse. And during my nursing training, our coordinator, who was also a teacher, lectured on a class relating to reproduction. It's important to know this teacher relished the opportunity to shoehorn in feminist propaganda when it was apposite. And we got given an unbridled dissertation on how the human life growing inside a woman's womb is more akin to a parasite. Good times.
like hair loss, your teeth, like all the calcium, everything goes to the baby. Everything goes to the baby.
Oh boy.
Would you consider being a mother one of your greatest achievements?
I would say that has to be balanced with it's also the hardest, scariest, most terrifying thing I've ever done. So it doesn't bring me the same amount of joy, because for as much joy as it brings me terror and fear. I have 3 little girls. One of them is disabled.
Called it. My mother is rolling in her grave at what this woman is saying. And I know what her response would be. Oh, well, why did you sleep with him then? I'm serious. My mum did not get along with other women. They were pansies to her. She was kind and gentle, don't get me wrong. She just understood the responsibility for her choices. And she loved children. Used to be a midwife. She could make other mothers jealous at how easily she could calm a baby down. Even make them smile.
I'm curious, Pearl, what's the point you're trying to make, that most single mothers could have prevented being in that situation?
Yeah, the guys that you're sleeping with, to put on a condom, you can get an abortion. Like, there's so many choices that if you are in the situation where you are a single mother, you didn't make one bad choice, you made like 10 bad choices.
And Pearl is right. For as long as women have the right of sexual selection, they have the responsibility of sexual selection.
I am pro-life.
What the fuck is that noise?
Otherwise, you're not as much of a woman, right? And it's when we frame things as women are supposed to be nurturing, and then if you don't have anyone to nurture, what are you, like, not a woman now? So that's one of the reasons these, like, gender norms, I think, are not helpful.
Probably the second most important question we could ask ourselves. Is it important for men to become fathers and be allowed to remain fathers?
Andrew Tate is having a positive influence on society.
Andrew Tate, yeah. We're not doing this chapter. Andrew Tate is just a jacked up version of our boy Ariel's last shred of masculinity, suckling through on a threaded cannula of erythropoietin and sand.
I feel like men's rights activists, we have a problem with grifters on our side. People...
You don't say! Ariel's last shred of masculinity dangling from the dreaded locks of a once pioneering hairstyle.
And feminism has been here as a historical movement and has achieved so much. And so it's ultimately the movement that we should all align with for, gender equality and the end of gender depression.
One day we might ask ourselves the question, did the women's rights movement ever exist? If that day ever comes, it will be a tragedy. I can only imagine we'd ask that question if in order to defeat feminism, we had to go through the hostage they're holding.
So I agree with everything my fellow feminists are saying. But when I entered this discussion, I was looking at male rights activists from a more antagonistic point of view. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that we could actually work together.
Yep.
Oh, please. Stop this charade. I can't take this isn't real. This isn't real. This world isn't real. I don't know where I am. I don't know where I am or who I'm talking to. Who are you? Who am I talking to? And who does he think he was talking to this whole time? A potted plant.
And I think men could pick up the slack on our end for once and actually help women.
I suspect there will be comments that say that you are not a men's rights activist.
Oh, of course.
What would your response?
Even the host can't believe that this 2 girls 1 cup shit show is in fact somehow supposed to be a pound of butter.
Feminism is such a widespread, men's rights activism is such a widespread.
A spread, yes. An eclectic spread of butter.
Say today that women need feminism. Name me one right I have as a man that they don't as a woman.
Bodily autonomy.
Do you have your penis still attached to its skin?
Bodily autonomy.
Good for you if you do. Just remember there's a billion boys and men who had that privilege removed at birth. And I'm not telling anyone to have a problem with that. I know a lot of you are fine with that. And that is fine.
When I ask feminists, what are you going to do about the boys' education gap? Half the time, they don't even know what it is.
What can they do?
But that's not fair. Like, I read Richard Reeves of Boys to Men. There's a lot of feminists on this side. A lot of the issues you say, like the draft, circumcision, feminists aren't like, I don't want anyone to be drafted. I don't think men or women
there is some.
Did they talk about circumcision at all? Or was it edited out? I'm pretty sure this is the first I've heard of it this whole debate. Outside of me saying it, that is.
Men and women are supposed to go together.
There's no rule to that at all. So when you say that, they go together, that's just your own subjective opinion.
That, right there, is exactly the kind of thinking is why the hostage is going down with the terrorist if it doesn't do anything to break free of their grip. Nature doesn't do anything in the evolution of life frivolously. Men and women were built with purpose. We were to help each other survive. We were to give each other a sense of meaning and fulfillment. You don't know this because of the privilege of a high-functioning civilization that deludes you into thinking men and women somehow don't need each other. And on top of this, you swallow a man-hating ideology that says they never did.
At the end of the day, when you have a group of people, when the men want it to be about them, they can do that. They can just be stronger, be bigger, be louder, take over, and make it about them.
I think I know why no one challenged her on this. Or if there is a response that's edited out. Because it's unashamedly stupid. She describes exactly what feminists did with men's spaces. And that's common knowledge at this point. It's one of men's complaints directed at women. We invited you into a space, you complained about how that space works, took it over, then made up some anachronistic lie that we've been denying you access to that space the whole time. I know. I was one of the men inviting women into our space, and I've been doing it since I was 5 years old. And I'm talking about video games. I've liked girls for as long as I can remember. I've wanted them to play games with me. In my experience, girls and women were of the opinion video games were stupid. They saw it as a childish activity, and some still do. I still encourage them to play anyway. Then one day women finally did start playing with us. And I watched, helplessly, as they attempted to destroy the gaming industry in a landslide of micromanaging political bullshit. Yes, I actually do still want women to play with us. Just stop trying to micromanage the hobby to suit your feminist sensibilities. Just shut up and play the game. Which is what we should have said to you in the first place.
Men created equal, that they meant humans. But the fact that women have had to fight to get the right to, the gendered laws, there are gendered laws so that women could vote. I think that's a fair.
So did men. The vote used to only belong to property owners, and women did vote, the ones who owned property. Men got the vote through negotiation. The notion was, if you expect us to fight your wars, give us the vote. Women got the vote through terrorism. The notion was, give us the vote, or we burn shit to the ground. To any women's rights advocates out there, are you proud of that? And we're at the end. I was being serious before. I didn't think I was going to be able to suffer through that or find the energy to keep saying things. But I needed a response video under my belt. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode and taken some thought-provoking points. I told you, I was bringing fire. I wasn't just being edgy. I was saying everything I would have had to have restrained myself from saying if I was there in person. Not because it's hurtful, but because it's direct to the tender spots, and it would really piss everybody off. That's what the truth does. It hits the tender spots you'd rather it didn't. I do it to you guys because it's your choice and your fault, and I needed to get this off my chest. I don't always blame the victim, but when I do, it's in video format over an hour long. So thank you for sticking with me all the way through. I imagine you're quite tired. I am. At the time of finishing this, it's 5 a.m. So I'll head off. Have a good morning. Good nights of the afternoon table. Yada yada.